Well, welcome everyone. I'm excited for everyone to be here today, and I wanted to start off by letting you know that we acknowledge that the Monacan Indian Nation as the traditional stewards of the land on which the University of Lynchburg now sits, and we offer our respect to the Monacan people, past, present, and emerging. It's my honor to be here today to help facilitate. My name is Jeremy Welsh, and I have the great honor of serving as the Chief Innovation Officer here at the University of Lynchburg and the Dean to the School of PA Medicine. And my family and my tradition and my heritage is from the Akwesasne Nation in Canada, which is where my father was originally from. And after his leaving Canada and coming to the United States, we actually were raised in the Onondaga Nation, which is actually in New York. So today I would like to have a chance to introduce our panelists, and I would ask that our panelists, if you can, to please raise your hand as I read your bio, just so that everyone that's on the video today is able to identify you as we go forward and talk a little bit. So our first panelist today is Bradley Branham. He's a member of the Monacan Indian Nation, is an artist and a nonprofit leader from Lynchburg, Virginia, where he earned a Bachelor's of Art from Lynchburg College. He formerly served as the managing director for VTA, where he had the opportunity to connect, develop, nurture, and be an advocate for artists of all ages at all levels from every corner of the Commonwealth. He now serves as the program manager for the SETC, a national nonprofit organization that is committed to connecting artists to educational and career opportunities across the United States. Our second panelist for today is Casey McGirt. Casey McGirt is a member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. Casey aims to educate others about their nation's tribal traditions, tribulations, and issues affecting not only their tribe, but their native country at large through art, photography, and public speaking. They are a co-director for a local inclusive art space, The Vault, a student, and an artist. Our third panelist for today is James Locklear. James Vincent Locklear is a member of the Lumbee tribe, is the founder and publisher of Native Visions magazine, the largest privately owned Native print publication in the United States. As a seasoned professional journalist and historian with more than 30 years experience, James is known for his ethics, integrity, effective communication, knowledge, and one of the best investigative and analytical minds in journalism. Our fourth panelist for today is Keith Anderson. Keith F. Anderson is the Assistant Chief and Environmental Project Director for the Native Indian Nation. In less than a year, the tribe has received national recognition due to the Native River Improvement and Oyster Garden initiatives. Spanning over 25 years, Keith has been one of the most recognized and sought-after cultural presenters in the country, sharing the traditions and admirations of his culture through his interpretation of the men's traditional dance. As the executive director of Red Crook Sky American Indian Dance Troupe, Keith and RCS organizations have been featured at over 170 venues across the country and abroad since 2006. Our fifth panelist for today is Teresa Medina Castillo. Teresa is the descendant of the long-hair clan of the Western Cherokee. She began her education in Tennessee at the age of 13. After 20 plus years of learning from her grandmother and many other teachers and masters, she was allowed to bring her tribal stories, lifeways, and crafts to anyone that desired to learn. Teresa also privately mentored part bloods so they could grow strong in themselves and have an understanding of their native roots. Thank you all of our panelists for being here today. And I'd like to start us off. So based on the title of today's courageous conversation, the myth, Native Americans are uneducated, alcoholic savages who are dependent on the government to survive. If you could please share your thoughts with us and feel free to pass it on to the next panelist and ask each other questions as you go. Thank you so much again for being here. Anybody want to start us off?
I'll speak up.
Thank you, Brad.
Thank you all for having us. And as a member of the Monacan Indian Nation, I want to just say thank you to the University of Lynchburg, and thank you to Dr. Welsh and Dr. Canada as well. They've been really instrumental in making sure that the university rolls out proper acknowledgments for the Native tribes and their community as we enter into this Heritage Month. So thank you all for that. I'm a first-generation college student who attended the University of Lynchburg, but I feel very fortunate in that fact. I do think it's important that while we have this webinar to talk about breaking stereotypes, that we do acknowledge the Native Americans that do suffer from poverty or that they suffer from addiction. We know that those statistics are not good for people in our community. But with that being said, I want to acknowledge that I think going off this title, I think a lot of communities have placed an image in their head of what Native Americans are and how they should look and what they should do. And I think people fail to realize that many Native Americans are working members of society. Obviously, some of them are restricted to reservations in some ways, but there are plenty that are not. And they hold all sorts of jobs, including my father, who now works at the University of Lynchburg, who sits on the tribal council, but he's also a maintenance supervisor during the day. Casey, I believe you said you were an artist as well, if I heard your bio correctly. So there are Native Americans that are educated and they're actually artists, or they're working white collar jobs, if you will. So I'll just start us off by saying that. Thank you all for having us.
Thank you, Bradley. Can everyone hear me okay? All right, I'm still at this Google. There we go. And I see you too. Yeah, I think it's an important conversation to have, and just mirroring some of the comments that Bradley made. You know, it's important to break down these stereotypes. You know, let people know who we are, what we're about. Tell our stories, basically, because our stories really have to be told. That is one reason that I started my publication 18 years ago, and I thank God that I'm still able to publish after 18 years. And if you'll look around my vehicle here, you'll see I'm just finishing up on my delivery route from last night. But yeah, there's a lot of great things happening out here, and obviously there are issues regarding not only alcoholism but other issues of substance abuse and so forth within the communities. And it's something that we need to look at, and something that we need to educate not only ourselves but other people about, and just let them know who we are. You know, I've been doing this 18 years, and I think in the last couple of years, the folks in the printer, they finally figured out that I'm not a truck driver. I actually own the paper, so yeah. But anyway, that's what we had to do: tell our stories and break down these stereotypes.
I can go ahead and talk a little bit. I am also a first-generation college student, so kind of invading the academic space has been interesting because I have come upon these stereotypes, similar stereotypes that, you know, we're poverty-stricken, which is true statistically, but it doesn't mean that it's pervasive in every community, that every Native should have this stereotype put upon them. And it also doesn't mean that a Native person cannot, an Indigenous person cannot rise above this preset in notion and the stereotype. And it doesn't mean that we're going to fall behind either. And so especially being in academia now and having these conversations is extremely important, because it broadcasts a light on this issue that could be addressed simply through larger amounts of education and making sure that more people know about the issues that are truly going on in Native country, and making sure that everyone is aware of, you know, how much that stereotype can affect other Natives that hear this. Because whenever I was doing another presentation about Native representation in just media and other forms and other contexts, something that I read was, you know, still in the Declaration, we're called noble savages. And it's this idea, you're perpetuating this kind of idea and then you're placing it onto natives. And that doesn't mean that it's true, first off, but it also creates this idea in your head that we cannot rise to the challenge and meet it. And I want to talk about and dismiss that, so that way other young natives aren't facing those same trials and tribulations that we're having to deal with now.
About what Casey was saying, excuse me, I recently was helping to edit a new curriculum that's supposed to come out in 2022, and they do have us listed as noble savages in the 4th grade book, and in the 6th grade book they have the Trail of Tears as a voluntary movement of Cherokee people to allow the settlers to have more land. Now, both of those things are categorically wrong, but children are getting taught this anyway. And that's very worrisome to me, that can go on and nobody seems to be challenging it, at least on a elementary grade level. I don't know if anybody else has got children in the elementary school system, but there seems to be a lot of that. The mythology, you have to wear feathers, you have to wear fringes. And it's very hard to teach when the children already have an expectation of what I'm supposed to look like, what I'm supposed to say, and how I'm supposed to act.
Teresa, I'm so glad you said that, just really quick, because when I first read this title, when Dr. Canada sent it to me, the first thing I heard was, you don't look Native, which is what we receive a lot, which plays into those stereotypes as to what a Native is supposed to look like.
Yeah, I guess we don't supposed to have bald heads and big gray beards, man. But I do sport my feather earring. I don't know if any of you guys see that. Keith, hey, look what I wore in honor of your dad, man.
That's incredible. Thank you, James.
Yes, sir.
I remember going recently to a elementary school to do a teaching, and I was in full regalia. And the principal, who was telling me all about all of her degrees and everything, kept looking over my left shoulder. And I finally said, "I'm sorry, am I in the way? Are you waiting for someone?" And she told me all about this wonderful Native teacher that was going to come and teach the entire school. And I said, "Well, I think you're looking for me." And she said, "Oh, you don't have on a fringed dress." And I said, "Well, you don't have on a business suit. That doesn't belie your education." But it's something that it's really ingrained. A lot of people think Casey is not Native. I've had to disabuse several people about that. And it's actually affected some of the courses that they were going to let her take in high school, because they didn't believe that she would go any farther than her heritage. She's Native, why go to higher education? And I found that very disturbing as one of my daughters, that to be told that.
I've had, on top of that instance, I've had other experiences within, I was also a foster care youth. So I've also had issues with the type of route that I would take. Like, I was going to be pregnant earlier than my counterparts. I got that conversation a lot. I got, again, conversations about my education. Like, are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure that you can? Questions that I did not feel like, my white peers were getting. All of these types of things because of this idea of the stereotype of what being Native is, especially, at the time before, the resurgence of everything. But I remember having those conversations and being totally confused at the time why I was getting this conversation and not my other peers. Now that I'm older, I can firmly say it's because I'm Native American.
Yeah. Great point, Casey. And I think it's just sad that here we are in 2021 and we're still dealing with these stereotypes, especially within the context of the public education system. I know I raised the question a couple of days ago. What are we teaching our kids about Native history in school? And of course, I have a biased opinion on that, I'm a journalist. I'm a historian. So, obviously I see a great deal of importance in that. But when our kids go away, they don't really look like everybody else. And I'm speaking from the perspective of a Lumbee. If we go to Chapel Hill, the folks up there are like, well, what are you? Well, I'm Lumbee. Well, tell me about the Lumbees. And then they draw a blank then. Well, our hero is Henry Berry Lowry. Well, what did he do? Yeah, he killed white folks. Well, there's a lot more to it than that. But, these are obviously smart kids. But if you don't teach this, if you don't teach them their history, if you don't teach them the importance of their heritage, and Keith, I'm really impressed by what you do too, brother, by the way. They're not going to know this stuff. And it's important that they do know it so that we can break down these stereotypes. Just like my daughter, for example, they're influenced greatly by what they see on TV. I tell her when she's like a little kid, maybe 3 years old, just starting to talk a little bit. I said, "Baby, you're Native American. Your people were, just telling her about our culture and our history." Well, the first thing flies in her mind is Bonanza. So she says, "No, Daddy, I'm not Indian. Indians are mean. They shoot people with arrows." And I'm like, "Hey, baby, that's not true." And it was really discouraging to have, to hear that from her, and have to figure out as a parent, well, how do I get past this? And it took a long time. And of course now she's really involved with the heritage and knows a lot of the history, but that was a bad experience there. And that's just one example.
Mr. Anderson?
Yeah, there's a common thread if you listen to the panelists and what they've shared, beyond the scope of a lot of the derogatory statements that have been published and continue to be published. There's a common thread too about the disparaging comments that have been made or inferred to as far as our appearances. And as Virginia Indians, we dealt with that tremendously during the times of, as Bradley knows, with Walter Plecker, who was the registrar of Virginia back in the 1900s. He adamantly said that there were no more Indians in Virginia and that we were practically mongrels. And he was instrumental in passing the Racial Integrity Act. And that was the one drop rule. So again, based upon European thought or white thought that there was a supremacist thought that, even though we lived and thrived in our communities, that one person or a small group of people had the power to say we existed or not. And that was our biggest fight towards federal recognition because of that blatant racism. And again, just looking too with the aspect and the derogatory terms of being savage and alcoholic and uneducated. If you look at us as a traditional people, if it wasn't for us, the Europeans wouldn't have lasted one winter. We definitely would, as a people, would not have made Jamestown a tribal village due to the environment and the brackish water. So you ask yourself, who's intelligent, who's not? So again, we're not passing the judgment, but again, we are inherently resilient, educated, intelligent, creative, and dynamic people. And we need to know and believe that from tradition on to today. So we have an obligation to continue to hold that model for generations.
Something a little off topic. Has anybody else run afoul of the medical system, assuming that Native Americans can't handle different drugs or different procedures just because of our genetic makeup?
Billy Belcourt, who is a Canadian Indigiqueer author, wrote an entire book about how Indigenous folk are regularly dismissed from the medical system as a whole, because there's this idea that because we have more addictive personalities, we're not given pain medications that we should be given. We're regularly excluded from research about pain medications. And then we're not believed, just like our Black relatives, where when we talk about pain and the pain that we experience, we're not believed about this, about our pain levels. So that's actually something that I've done some research on, and it's very, very common practice for Native Americans not to be believed about their pain.
I think a lot of medical professionals, especially with our elders and our very young people, they automatically assume that you're drug seeking, not realizing that just because we're a different ethnic background, that we have the same pain everybody else does. And I know women are discounted, but being a Native woman, it's even harder to get doctors to actually pay attention. And it's not just me and Casey. Casey had a problem with that a few years ago, but it's also other girls that I mentor. They'll go in with something like appendicitis and be told, oh, take a couple of aspirin, you're fine. And I do think it's that this mindset that medical professionals have that Native Americans are all drug addicts and alcoholics, and let's not make their increase their ability to get drugs that they don't actually need. And it, at least in the southern states, I found that very predominant.
I think there's a level of distrust in a lot of ways. If I can add to that, Teresa, Keith, thank you so much for just mentioning the struggle that's specific to the Virginia tribes, especially of Walter Plecker. I think what I have found is, looking back in our history, a lot of natives didn't even seek medical attention because there was great distrust, especially if going to the doctor meant that your birth certificate could literally be changed to remove your identity from you, essentially. And by that, I mean changing your race on your birth certificate when you went to have a child to say Black instead of Native American. And we fought for years to be able to go back and change those birth certificates. But because of that, not only in the healthcare sector, but also in the educational sector, where there were these inequities, I think there is still a lot of distrust with Native American populations. I think, and specifically with our tribe, one good thing that's happening is we were federally recognized in 2018, which means we'll now have access to Indian health services, which is specifically for us. And I think our tribe is planning to build Indian health services in Amherst County, Virginia, to help also with reestablishing a lot of the trust, so that Native people from our tribe will feel comfortable going to the doctor, and we'll have a face that is consistent and that they trust. But I think as we recognize a lot of these stereotypes and talk about the progress, it's important to realize that there's a history behind why those stereotypes exist. There is a reason that Native populations have lived in poverty. There's a history behind why those Native populations have not been highly educated. And a lot of that comes from segregation in the United States. So I feel like we are now on the cusp of coming out of that, but we do have a lot of work to do. And I do think there's a lot to celebrate with that, especially this past year after the social injustices that took place that really ignited a lot of the conversation around minorities in America. So I think my point being is that I do think a lot of that distrust from the Native side exists, and that it's justified, but there are structures in place that are hopefully going to help us as communities come out of that and be able to trust our providers a little bit more But it's not just about trusting providers. It's obviously about being able to even access healthcare when you live in poverty as well. So a lot of good things that are on the horizon, but we still have a lot of progress.
If I may take the liberty and ask if there are any other Native Indigenous folks on the call today, if you would love to hear your voice on this matter, so choose.
Yeah, I am Native. I'm a member of the Choctaw Nation, and so is my father. He's on the call, Daniel Harrison. So, pleasure to be here with everyone.
Mr. Harrison, Elijah Harrison, or Mr. Daniel Harrison, any thoughts on the subject matter?
I was gonna, yeah, I do have a couple of thoughts. Thank you, Dr. Canada. And yeah, Halito. That's nice to have Casey on here, another Choctaw. So that's always fun. Yeah, being from Oklahoma, where things are definitely different. The story's different a little bit from our Virginia and North Carolina tribes, and the end result has been different. I mean, there's so many differences within, and we say Indian country where I'm from. I know that's offensive to probably most people on here. I apologize. So native, we'll call it native country. But healthcare is just what a great topic to bring up. Not only just how lifespans of native peoples versus dominant white culture people versus also other minorities in our country, and how healthcare is handled just in general. What an interesting topic. I mean, we've had healthcare services, Indian hospitals. We that's what we call them in Oklahoma. Again, no offense, but what is the level of care and trust and have segregated hospitals is a pretty. Some people in here, I'm sure, are just like shocked. What, you have segregated hospitals? Yeah, we do. And most of those are not served by Native peoples. So now the first medical school, Native American medical school, has been established now. I think at Northeastern in Oklahoma, which is amazing. That now that's producing Native doctors. But I mean, this is such boy, what a subject you have opened up. I think at the core of how we treat humans with dignity, and how we're treating each other as animals as well. So I think last night at another talk, we talked about blood quantums and man, if you get into Oklahoma, it's a lot of politics. When you got 39 tribes all vying for resources, people are searching and seeking and trying to find ways to cut each other sometimes, and that's not helpful. I wonder sometimes if that was by design. I think when you put 39 tribes together and limited resources, and they spend all their time just fighting each other, so that's not the right way to do things either. So just there's so much here, so many layers of how to try to unpack what you all have brought up bravely, by the way.
Daniel, I'm so glad that you mentioned the differences between all the tribes, because I think it's another stereotype that's out there, that all Native Americans fall under this same historic umbrella. And that is not the case. While we are all Native American, we all have different histories, different ways in which we worship, and we have all been impacted differently by the atrocities that took place in America, quite frankly. And I think that's important to remember, as a lot of people who aren't Native go into this Heritage Month to do your own research on the tribes that are local to your area and realize that history is different from a lot of other tribes in the nation. Yes, we have shared experiences, but a lot of us also have different experiences.
I was thinking about what you said just now. We would no more say everybody who came from Europe worshiped the same or looked the same or needed to be educated the same, but we do that with our Native children and Natives in general. And we have made great strides, but there's still a lot I think we have to do. And frankly, I'm hoping that we can do something before My grandchildren have to face this.
So at this point, I'm going to invite others to ask questions of our panelists, and both Mr. Daniel Harrison and Mr. Elijah Harrison, if you would like. And if you're not comfortable speaking, you can put it in the chat. Okay, I'll ask the first question then. What's one thing that you never want to hear someone say about Native Americans again?
That we're lazy and uneducated. I think that's one of the worst stereotypes out there, along with the alcoholic part, because it could be nothing further from the truth. You know, we're talented people. We're highly educated and highly successful. And if you'll allow me, Dr. Canada, I just want to show off a couple of covers here to prove that. And of course, this is a little bias from the Lumbee, but this guy's name is Joey Knuckles. If you have any NASCAR fans out there, he was the crew chief for the legendary Davey Allison. He was a part of 7 Daytona 500 winning teams. And this guy is up your way. He's the new head coach at Longwood University, Chad Oxendine. And of course, you know, military heroes, you know, galore. And I've uncovered about 10 Lumbee pilots from the Second World War. But there again, that goes back to storytelling. It's up to us to tell these stories, and it's up to us to educate our people. And there are so many great stories out there. Just Keith, I want to go back to you again. You know, your dad, he was played professional football for 10 years. You know, amazing stories. But we had to figure out a way to, you know, we've got to find these stories and we've got to get them told. And that's what my mission has been with Native Visions, because, you know, history has not been kind to our people. Indians, as you called them, Daniel, which I'm not offended at, you know, natives, you know, they tell us the story of how Columbus found us, you know, and, you know, nothing further from the truth. We got to figure out a way to dismiss these stereotypes and get the truth out there. Tell the story of our people so that when they think of Native Americans, they think of people, you know, like these guys right here, you know, successful individuals. Kelvin Sampson, another great example. If you guys watch college basketball, he's the head coach of the University of Houston, and they actually went to the Final Four last year. Another example, Keenan Allen, all-pro wide receiver, Los Angeles Chargers. There's so many more stories. Yeah.
I think I would say my regular point of stop telling Native people that they don't look Native, because when you say that, my immediate response is, what is a Native supposed to look like? And what you think a Native is supposed to look like is probably based on an incorrect assumption. So let's stop doing that. And let's stop categorizing people based on how they looked as well. And going off of that really quick, if it's okay, Dr. Canada, I see some questions related to that in the chat. Taylor said, what do you think of Native representation in media? Do you think that it could be better? I think media in general is a very broad spectrum, but speaking as someone who works with a lot of groups in the arts industry and the performing arts industry, I do think it could be better. Unfortunately, there's still red face that takes place. There are plenty of arts groups that still use Caucasian actors and actresses to portray Native Americans. In some instances, they've been given permission to do that by the tribe whose land they are participating on. But we still have a lot of work to do. I think my response to that would be, I think we can do a better job to engage Native populations when portraying them. If you live somewhere in the United States, you're most likely living on Native land and have a tribe nearby. So if you are writing a book, if you're doing a piece of art, if you are filming a show, consult those Native tribes that live near you. Go and spend time with them, and not just consult them, but invite them to be a part of the process and to be a part of the community.
If I can add one bit to that, Bradley, being a member of the media, one way to address that issue is to find out who your local media folks are. TV, radio, what have you, and even social media now. And feed these stories to them. You know, if you're doing if you're honoring a World War II veteran at your powwow this weekend, let them know about it. And it goes back to my point earlier about telling those stories. That's important. And, you know, I've been in the media for 30 years, and the majority of it has been with my own, you know, as a publisher. But I was a staff writer with the Fayetteville Observer, the local daily paper here. And oftentimes, you know, reporters are scrambling to get stories, and they're always looking for great ideas. And we've got to, as Native people, we've got to sell those stories. We've got to engage folks in the newsrooms everywhere, because, you know, what are their thoughts of Native Americans? Well, as you just pointed out, they don't look like me, obviously. They look more like those Italian actors and actresses that you know, they've had in Gunsmoke and all these other westerns through the years. But we've got to get out and find these stories, find these interesting people, and get those stories told, and dispel those myths and those stereotypes.
We have another question, or two more questions in the chat. One from our very own Dr. Laura Henry Stone. She said, "Thank you for spending time with us this afternoon." She says, "What can the University of Lynchburg do to help deconstruct some of these myths?"
Offer education. Well, let me first back up and say that Dr. Canada has been really great with helping us answer this question this month. We recently wrote a longer land acknowledgement, which I'm sure will be passed out to the Lynchburg community at some point. So that's a first step, just acknowledging that we exist and we're there and a part of that community. As a graduate of the University of Lynchburg, I think we've got to get natives educated, and I think we've got to get them access to education. Keith, you might be able to speak more about that. You had spoken about some of the programs that Virginia Tech and UVA have and their partnerships with the tribes, but we've really got to give them better access to education, and that doesn't mean giving them access and then sending them away with thousands of dollars of loans that will keep them in a poverty-stricken cycle that they can never get out of. It is access, and it is scholarships and grants and awards that can ease the burden and not put them into a financial crisis after they leave higher ed.
Go ahead, Mr. Anderson.
Can you guys hear me? Because I think I got booted out by some.
Yes, we can hear you.
We can hear you, Keith.
Okay. Well, yeah, as Bradley said, I'm very fortunate. Right now, the Virginia Federally Recognized Tribes have created the Virginia Tribal Education Consortium. And our primary purpose is to further education for our communities throughout Virginia, and to establish indigenous positions within those universities and institutions. And historically, again, this is probably news to a lot of non-native Virginians. Past elementary school, Virginia natives did not have another resource for education. in the state. We had to go to Oklahoma, Cherokee, Bacone College for advanced education. So we cannot attend college in our own state. So again, as of now, we are fighting for that opportunity for our community to be, for that injustice to be righted. And as of now, I can say schools like Virginia Tech and UVA have accepted their role in this process and have been great advocates so far. So we are very positive about the potential moving forward. Thanks.
And one thing that the University of Virginia and Virginia Tech does well is that they actually send representatives into the Native populations. So it's not setting up resources and just expecting Native communities to come to you. It's the actual college university going out to those Native populations and either having roundtable discussions, having events where they talk about the opportunities, or helping those Native populations with the actual process of applying for those colleges and universities.
We have another question from Dr. Willis. What books or resources would you consider essential reading to deepen one's understanding of Native American spirituality, ingenuity, and history?
I think we've been listing some of those in the chat as a response, Dr. Canada, if that was the one in regards to the books.
Gotcha. Thank you, Casey.
Yeah, I just listed like a pretty short list of some books that I found that really helped me understand more about Indigenous history and activism specifically. Other resources that you can look into that has actually been really helpful for me is a podcast called All My Relations. It's a group of Indigenous women who talk about different aspects of spirituality, sexuality, history, and they also bring in other experts in different Indigenous fields to talk about things that are going on in Native country right now.
Yeah, and to add to that, I really enjoyed the History Channel documentary 500 Nations. I found that one to be very educating. And as far as books, one of my favorites was Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee by D. Brown. And I actually read that one as a high school sophomore back in 1984. And it gave me an understanding, being from a non-reservation tribe, the Lumbee, what it was like for those folks during that time period. And as a Lumbee historian, I found out exactly, what a lot of our folks were doing in that same time period. So, that one really helped as well.
Yeah, I can also add, as far as, our travel initiatives, and as we all know that so much of our Indigenous history and culture has been watered down or dumbed down, that we are taking an active role to actually sit down with department educators throughout the state to rectify and to revamp the literature that has been shared with our Indigenous communities and throughout the whole state. So again, that is a very prevalent and important initiative that we are very active in right now.
Yeah, just jumping back to just Amy's question. I'm sorry, Dr. Henry Stone's question about what can the University of Lynchburg do. I know I had mentioned obviously creating more access for education to help break the stereotypes, but I think anytime there's education involved, again, consult the Native tribes that most likely live within your community. If you're speaking about Natives, have Natives come and provide insights or to answer any questions that your classroom might have. I think we are all more than willing to share our culture and history, since it's been so buried in a lot of ways. So I think the first step is just reaching out, creating a dialogue and creating an invitation.
And Bradley, I think that's a really good point about its visibility. Its visibility. I think that I'm just shocked at the University of Lynchburg sometimes when folks don't even realize that we're on Monacan lands, and don't know anything about the Monacan people. It's embarrassing. I think that's probably what Laura's also referring to. I mean, it's a little bit shameful, right? Shame on us. Shame on all of us. And I was just at a talk last night there on campus, and Elijah, my son, brought up a really good way to raise visibility. It's a small thing, but it's the beginning of things, right? So Elijah, if you wanted to share your idea that you were talking about.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
Sheila's already mentioned it there. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, so we have on Drysdale the corridor with all the flags, and I was thinking about maybe adding a Monacan Nation flag, but not just adding it, but creating a sort of a ceremony and inviting Monacan Nation, and making it a big event. And maybe we can have panelists such as you there and you, Bradley, and so we can educate people on our campus about the Monacan tribe and about the land that this place sits on. So
I would be delighted to help with that, Elijah. And of course, my family is still in that area, so I come back quite often, even though I'm in North Carolina. But you're right, Daniel. I think the word is visibility, and it's visibility in the workplace. It's visibility in education. As Keith mentioned earlier, I think for a lot of us, over time, our identities and our culture were just dismantled by the government through segregation, and it's taken us a long time to get that culture and to be able to take pride in those identities, and especially for some of the elders. So I think in terms of visibility, just letting people know we're here. We have always been here. Native Americans are an integral part of every community. But like Daniel said, it's a lack of knowledge, and we just have to make it visible to them. I'll also say, I think it's important when we talk about EDIA work in general, it's important to remember that work should not always fall onto the populations that have been impacted by the inequities. It should fall upon those institutions that progress the inequities.
I agree there that everybody needs to take part in getting us back where we need to be. But what you mentioned, Bradley, about our elders, we're losing so many of the elders that have personal stories about what happened to them growing up, the mission schools. My mother tried desperately for 40 years to pass as white. We need to it's so easy to record voice and video. We need to record all these elders and make a resource that you can go and look up your tribe, look up your nation, look up your clan. If my grandmother, Black Agnes, were here, you could look up and hear her stories. There was another member of our tribe our clan that walked the Trail of Tears. And she gave me some of her memories, but she's been dead for a long time now, and that's all gone. All of our writings, they were destroyed if we had them. So most of our history is oral. Yeah. And I think we need to find the elders and get that recorded while we still have the chance.
Yeah, that's a great point, Teresa. And that's actually something that I do here among the Lumbees. I recorded about maybe 250 hours of taped interviews. I got one Lumbee elder 3 weeks ago. She is 100 years old now. And she told me stories about the first school bus among the Lumbees. Because, you always hear these stories about how they walked to school in 4 feet of snow, barefooted, and, with only blue jean shorts on. But, yeah, she told me stories about that school bus. She told me stories about that school. And you're absolutely right. Once those folks pass on, that history is gone with them as well. Mm. And that's for the most part, a lot of the Lumbees were not able to attend school, like in my grandmother's era, my great grandmother's era, people born after the Civil War. Heck, we only had school starting in about the 1880s. So, they weren't, they weren't taught to read and write, so there was no recorded history there. You can't write this stuff down. So it's important for us now, especially those folks that were born in the early 1920s. There's not many of them left now. Those World War II veterans. If you can get those folks in front of the camera, get them to talk. And sometimes they can't remember what they did for lunch yesterday, but they can tell you about taking those little tin pail buckets to school with biscuits and sausage and fatback and cornbread and that sort of thing that they had for lunch back in the 1920s, sitting under the oak tree next to the one-room school. And we actually still have one of those schools left here in Lumbee country. We're trying to get it moved over to tribal land. It's that school was actually my grandmother's school. It was built in 1897, if I'm not mistaken. It's one of about I think there's only 3 of those schools left in the state of North Carolina now. But that's very important. And if you guys can, I encourage you, get out there among your communities. If you have folks, especially folks 90 years and older, and I'd encourage you to start with the folks that are if you can find them 95 and up, because they have valuable information. If they pass before you get that stuff recorded, man, it's sad because that's lost history.
And that's really a celebration in itself, because that history was silenced for so long. And I think those elders, their identities were silenced for a long time. I think if you're attending this and you're not a Native American, I would encourage you just to do some homework this month to look at Native American history in its entirety, especially how Jim Crow and segregation impacted Native Americans. Keith had mentioned Walter Plecker. If you really want history that will make your blood boil, go look up Walter Plecker and look up the history of Virginia tribes, where there was effectively a paper genocide and those last names were blacklisted. And it created a fear amongst the elders to the point where they didn't even want to mention out loud that they were Native. Their mindset was, we're Native, we know what we are, and that was it. So to James and Teresa's point, the fact that we're now able to gather these stories and that our elders are able to come forward and share with pride who they are, I think that is a celebration in itself. And that's an accomplishment based on just tribal history.
In the time we have remaining, and again, I really hate cutting this short. It'll just be a continuation because we will come together again. Matt Johnston from the University of Lynchburg put a question in the chat, and I don't think anyone answered, but it's around cultural appropriation, and we know that's been prevalent for decades in this country. So this question is, what do you believe is the greatest danger for non-Indigenous people who practice ceremonies like the peyote that are performed by non-Native Americans? And so one or two of you can answer that.
Yeah. I can definitely say I've known of instances. Matter of fact, I have Hunker family that are Lakota, and they live in Pine Ridge, and I've been blessed to have ceremony with them and do sweats. And during my time out there, I've heard several stories of non-natives trying to copy the ceremonies based upon maybe something they read or something they watched on TV, and people have actually died. So you're talking about the ultimate sacrifice for, again, doing things either the wrong way or not being supervised. And again, our ceremonies, our culture, it's not a joke. It's not a game. And even when we are doing ceremony and participating in things that we have to gear ourselves up emotionally, physically, and spiritually to go through some of these things. So again, it's not, like I said before, it's nothing to minimize or to play with, because again, there's inherent danger to it. So we really do, as human beings, just say, please, leave it alone. It is not a game.
I think there was a Boy Scout troop that did a sweat a few years ago, and they actually killed people accidentally, while performing the sweat, they had no knowledge. They had not done a sweat lodge before, and I think people actually died. But also, I feel like it's using our spirituality without having to live as a Native. It is utilizing our spirituality for their benefits without having to undergo the treatment that other Natives have had to undergo, if that makes sense.
I mean, I think all of us have actually learned how to do these things properly. We did have a group of women not far from me who, out of the 12 of them, 10 of them ended up in the hospital. And one of them had a stroke because they decided to have a sweat. And they put gasoline on the fire. I'm surprised they weren't all burned to death. And that's something else that educators need to let the young people know. It might look interesting, it might look fun, but it can be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah. And my advice would be, leave it to the pros. I'm a newsman. I'm a historian. I'm not, the only sweat lodge I've gone into is the sauna at him. So I'm not going to be putting myself out there trying to teach people about that when I don't know anything about it. I'll consult with a professional. I'll keep you in mind with, when I learned the grassroots dances and all the other important parts of the culture. But as far as getting out there, showing people how to do it, leave it to the pros.
All right, so we're 4 o'clock. I'm going to ask if there's one last thing our panelists would like to leave us with. If not, that's fine. So I'm going to start with Mr. Branham.
I think I've said enough, but thank you all again for arranging this, and again just giving us the visibility and giving us the space to come together and talk. It's so good meeting the rest of you. Keith, it was good seeing you again. And again, as you go into Native American Heritage Month, just do your homework. Maybe even do some volunteer hours for the tribe in your community. Create that connection and that bridge.
Thank you. Ms. Castillo.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's nice to know that there are other people out there interested. Sometimes you kind of feel alone when you're in a rural area the way I am. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McGirt.
Again, going off what Bradley said, just make sure that you're staying educated. Make sure that you're looking at history in its totality. Make sure you're putting that history first before you speak on an issue that you're uneducated about. And always make sure that whenever you try to speak out of turn, that there are others more educated than you, and always turn to those who are more educated than you.
Thank you. Mr. Locklear?
Just get those stories told, folks. And, let's break down these myths and these stereotypes, and let's continue to encourage one another, and let's continue to network and support one another. And I say that as a member of the Lumbee tribe. Here in the last couple of days, our tribal recognition bill Congress did pass it. So it goes to the Senate now. And if you guys have any suggestions or anything that would help us, or any kind of folks that you have contacts with who could help our tribes in its efforts to become federally recognized, we would appreciate that. And I just look forward to continuing to have this conversation, not just let it be through Native American History Month. Let's have this conversation year round, and let's teach this history. And I want to encourage each and every one of us. I'm a sports fan, so let's send a letter to ESPN, because they deservedly so, they do feature Jackie Robinson and all the famous African American athletes during February. The Hispanic Heritage Month just passed us, but we get to Native American Month, and it's like we don't exist. We don't have any athletes out there, but and that's just one story among many that need to be told. But it's going to be up to us. Like I said, those folks aren't going to tell these stories unless we put them out there, unless we tell them about your father, Keith, unless we tell them about Kelvin Sampson, you know, they're not going to get those stories out there. So let's be diligent about doing that.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson?
Yeah, again, Dr. Cannon, I wanted to thank you, the Lynchburg College and staff, for having this forum, and it's phenomenal to meet all the panelists. And I definitely want to give a special acknowledgement to the Harrison family, Daniel and Elijah. It is so important for, a lot of times people talk about the sometimes the separatist nations between East Coast and West Coast tribes. And again, thank you so much for your participation today. And hopefully my family will get a chance to come out and visit you guys in Oklahoma. And thank you all for the ones who took your time out today for the hour to be a part of this very important forum. And have a blessed day.
Thank you. And with all, thank you, Mr. Anderson. All due respect, Mr. Harrison, both. Any?
No, thank you for allowing us to share this time with you. Thank you. Learned a lot.
Thank you. Well, again, on behalf of the Office of Equity and Inclusion, particularly Multicultural Services and Inclusive Excellence, thank you so much for joining in. Panelists, I can never repay you for your time and your talents and your treasures, and for pouring into the university and just giving us more knowledge about our responsibility, but also about Native people. Dr. Welsh, thank you for facilitating and for welcoming our guests, and we will definitely be in touch in the future. So thanks again.